In the cemetery, a woman he had never seen for 35 years was crying at the grave next to her husband's. Madame Rossa couldn't dare to leave her late husband's grave. The woman turned to her with a familiar sparkle in her eyes. "You? Are you Joe's wife?" she asked, trembling. She had never seen this woman before, but somehow she seemed to recognize her. Madame Rossa was 68 years old, but every Thursday afternoon her feet dragged her down the same path. She left home at exactly 2 p.m., bought red roses from florist Antonio at 2:20 p.m., and entered through the iron gates of Oakwood Cemetery at 2:45 p.m. 35 years. This routine had never been broken. This was the only constant thing left in her life. "Hello, my love," she whispered to her husband, to Joe's white marble headstone. As she carefully arranged the flowers, she continued, "I listened to your favorite opera this morning again. Of course there was no one to listen with me. Silence as always, only the rustling of distant trees and bird songs." Madame Rossa knelt down and cleaned the dust on the headstone. She ran her fingertips over the letters. Joe Moretti, 1940. Every week the same ritual, the same love. But today there was something different. When Madame Rossa raised her head, her breath stopped. About 15 meters away in the cemetery, an elegant-looking elderly woman was crying silently. This alone wasn't unusual. It was common to see people crying in cemeteries. But this woman was different. She looked as if she had found something she'd been searching for a long time. And even stranger, the woman was standing at the grave right next to Joe's. Madame Rossa had been coming to this cemetery for 35 years. She had never noticed that side grave, or had noticed it but hadn't cared. But now, looking carefully, she could see the headstone. Isabella Moretti, 1942, the same last name as her husband. Her heart began to beat rapidly. Who was Isabella? Joe's relative? His cousin? His sister? The woman, as if feeling Madame Rossa's gaze, raised her head. Their eyes met, and at that moment, like a lightning strike, the woman jumped to her feet. "You," the woman cried out. Her voice was both surprised and accusatory. "Are you Joe's wife?" Madame Rossa froze. How did this woman know her husband? And more importantly, how had she recognized her? "Yes," Madame Rossa replied, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "I'm Rossa, Joe's wife. Who are you?" The woman looked at her for a few seconds, then turned to examine Joe's headstone. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'm Guinevere," she said quietly. "Guinevere back, or more precisely, I used to be Guinevere Moretti." Madame Rossa's world spun. "Moretti," she stammered. But how is that possible? I know about Joe's family. He never mentioned anyone named Guinevere." Guinevere turned with a bitter smile. "Of course he didn't mention it, because I was part of his past, a chapter that needed to be erased." "What do you mean?" Guinevere took a deep breath. "Isabella," she said, pointing to the adjacent grave. "She was my sister. And Joe was her husband." The world seemed to slip from under Madame Rossa's feet. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible. Joe married me in 1972. I'm his only wife." "Yes," Guinevere said quietly. "You married in 1972. But didn't you know, in 1970, Joe was married to Isabella?" Madame Rossa's knees began to tremble. She tried to stay standing by holding on to the headstone. No, she repeated. "Joe told me everything. He said there was a woman in his past, but they had separated. It was over. He never said they were married." Guinevere approached. Now the lines on her face were more visible. She must have been in her 65s, elegant but tired. "Because he couldn't say it," Guinevere said. "Because while Isabella was still alive, Joe married you." Silence. Only the howling of wind among the headstones. Madame Rossa collapsed to the ground. Her hands were trembling. So Joe, did he commit bigamy?" Guinevere nodded. "Yes, he married Isabella in 1970. In Italy, in a small village. My family was very happy. Joe was a good man, or so we thought. Then he got a job offer, moved to America. Isabella wanted to follow him, but Joe said not yet. Let me settle first, then I'll bring you, he said. She continued. We waited 2 years. For 2 years, Isabella wrote letters every week, but no reply ever came from Joe. In 1972, my family got worried. I came to America to search for Joe. I found him in New York, and I saw he was living with a woman, with you. Madame Rossa's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I know, Guinevere said softly. You were a victim too. But Isabella died with a broken heart. In 1988, from a heart attack. The same year your husband died. The same year, Madame Rossa repeated. Joe also died in 1988. Heart attack. The two women looked at each other. Two strangers, sharing the same pain. What should I do? Asked Madame Rossa. For 35 years I loved him. I came here every week. I lived for him. Now I'm learning that he cheated on me, abandoned another woman. Guinevere sat down next to her. You know, I asked the same question for years. After Isabella died, I wondered if I should forgive Joe. I still wonder. Silence. But, Guinevere continued, then I realized something. Anger and hatred were just eating me up. It wasn't bringing Isabella back. It wasn't punishing Joe. It was just leaving me alone. Madame Rossa wiped her tears. So how did you continue? Right here, Guinevere said, pointing to Isabella's grave. I come here every week, Thursday afternoons. Madame Rossa's heart stopped. Thursday afternoons? Yes, for 35 years, at 2:45 p.m. Me too, Madame Rossa whispered. I've also been coming Thursday afternoons for 35 years, at 2:45 p.m. The two women looked at each other, and suddenly everything made sense. 35 years, same day, same time, two graves side by side, two women, unaware of each other. So, Guinevere said slowly, we've been here every week, just 15 meters apart from each other, and we never met, said Madame Rossa. How is that possible? Maybe, said Guinevere, maybe because the time for us to meet hadn't come yet. The sun began to set over the cemetery. Golden lights fell on the headstones. Guinevere, said Madame Rossa, I'm sorry, for Isabella. If I had known. No, said Guinevere, you didn't know, and I can't hate you either, because you, like me, love Joe, real love. Madame Rossa nodded. But what do we do now? Will we still keep coming to these graves? Guinevere stood up. She extended her hand to Madame Rossa. We'll come together, she said. We're not alone anymore. Madame Rossa took her hand. The two women stood between the two graves. You know, said Madame Rossa, Joe told me something. Before he died, in the hospital. Rossa, he said, if you ever learn the truth, please forgive me, and please don't be alone. Guinevere's eyes filled with tears. Isabella also told me something. In her final moment, Guinevere, she said, I forgave Joe. You forgive him too, because anger kills us. The two women looked at each other. Maybe, said Guinevere, maybe they wanted us to meet here. Maybe, said Madame Rossa, maybe this is their last gift, bringing two lonely women together. From that day on, every Thursday afternoon, two women could be seen side by side at Oakwood Cemetery. One would bring red roses, the other white lilies. Together they would arrange the flowers, sit together, cry silently together, smile together. Guinevere told Madame Rossa about Isabelle's life, how she was a painter, how she made beautiful paintings in Italy, how she fell in love with Joe at first sight. Madame Rossa told about the years she spent with Joe, how romantic he was, how he made surprises every anniversary, how he played piano in the evenings. And slowly the two women realized they hadn't actually loved the same man. Joe had been two different men, one for Isabelle, another for Rossa. You know, Guinevere said one day, sometimes I wonder, was Joe really a bad man, or was he just a lost man? Madame Rossa thought, maybe both. Maybe he was a man stuck between two lives, unable to decide. Or maybe, said Guinevere, maybe he was a man trying to be happy in both lives but failing in neither. Weeks passed. The two women began to meet not only at the cemetery, but in other areas of their lives. They drank coffee together, listened to opera together, went for walks together. Madame Rossa began teaching Guinevere Italian. Guinevere taught Madame Rossa how to paint. One day, Guinevere brought a box to Madame Rossa. "What's this?" asked Rossa. "Isabella's letters," said Guinevere. "All the letters she wrote to Joe from 1970 to 1972. He never replied to any of them, but I kept them." Madame Rossa opened the letters. Each one was filled with pure love. Isabella wrote about her love for Joe, her faith in him, the dreams she would build with him. "This is so sad," said Madame Rossa with tears. "Yes," said Guinevere, "but there's one more thing." At the bottom of the box there was another letter. But this wasn't Isabella's handwriting, it was Joe's handwriting. "This," said Madame Rossa. "The only letter Joe wrote to Isabella," said Guinevere. "I think Joe wrote this letter but couldn't find the courage to send it." Madame Rossa opened the letter. It was written in Joe's familiar handwriting. "Dear Isabella, if you're reading this letter, it means I found the courage and sent it to you. Or maybe I didn't find it, and this letter never reached you. Forgive me, I'm the most cowardly of cowards. I loved you, but I also loved Rossa. I was stuck between two lives. I tried to make both of you happy, but in the end, I disappointed both of you. I know you won't forgive me. You're right, I don't deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know that the days I spent with you were the most beautiful days of my life, and the days I spent with Rossa were too. I wasn't a bad man, Isabella. I was just a lost man. Between two worlds, between two loves. I hope that one day you and Rossa will find each other, because you both shared the same pain. You both loved me, and maybe that pain will bring you closer together. With love forever, Joe." After reading the letter, the two women remained silent for a long time. "So," said Madame Rossa, "Joe knew this. He knew we would meet one day, or he hoped," said Guinevere. "And he was right," said Madame Rossa. "We found each other." Guinevere smiled. "It took 35 years, but yes, we did." From that day on, Madame Rossa and Guinevere became not just friends but family. Two women who shared the same pain, loved the same man, but finally found each other as two soulmates. Madame Rossa was no longer alone on Thursday afternoons. Guinevere was beside her. Together they would visit Joe's and Isabella's graves, arrange the flowers together, share their memories together. And sometimes, when the sun set, the two women would look at each other and smile, because they knew that life sometimes turned the most painful things into the most beautiful gifts. Joe had deceived them, but at the same time, after his death, he had brought them together. That's why, every Thursday afternoon at Oakwood Cemetery, two headstones stand side by side, Joe Moretti and Isabella Moretti, and in front of both, two women standing together, Madame Rossa and Guinevere back. Because true friendship comes from the most unexpected places, sometimes from pain, sometimes from betrayal, sometimes from death, but always from love. The things we think we've lost sometimes bring us the most valuable gifts. Madame Rossa and Guinevere, even though they shared the same man, finally found each other, and that bond became stronger than any love, because true connection is born from shared pain, and shared pain transforms into the deepest friendships.